Suge Knight used to be one of the most feared men in the American hip-hop space. He was a record label owner with some of the biggest names in the 90s under his wings. Despite having such an imposing reputation, you are not going to believe the disturbing message that Suge Knight sent from jail.
I do, but you told me I was allowed to have more than one attorney, as long as I have one primary attorney. And now, as we speak,
you can have as many attorneys as you want.
But they're not allowing them to see me or allow me to communicate with them or talk to them.
Today's video explores some of the most shocking things that happened to Suge Knight after he went to jail, and the disturbing message that he sent from jail. The message. The level of maltreatment that Suge Knight went through while in jail was so tough that he had to speak out. In April 2016, Knight got the opportunity to speak to a judge in a pre-trial hearing concerning what he faced in jail. The first major issue on the almost endless list of challenges was a jailhouse informant who had access to his murder case file when his lawyers could not. Another major problem that you would expect even in a murder case was the jailers that prevented Knight's attorneys from meeting with him freely or at all. Based on court papers filed by Knight's counsel at the time, he highlighted a couple of things that were allegedly done to frustrate Suge Knight's defense. The paper reads that on the 17th of March 2015, the presiding judge Ronald Cohen entered a court order restricting Suge Knight from benefits that include sending mail, receiving visitors, and even making calls. The paper also claimed that another order was signed by Judge William Ryan on the 29th of January 2016 that further restricted Suge Knight's liberties. Knight told the court that an informant named Danny Timms had somehow gotten access to his murder case file and even showed it to him. Apart from the fact someone within the prison walls had access to his records, his attorneys were still yet to lay hands on this file. Knight's attorney at the time, Thaddeus Culpepper, also wrote in his filing that officers planted Timms close to Suge Knight so that he could find a way to trick Suge into admitting. He also claimed in his filing that the intention was to lie and state that Knight confessed that he intended to run over Carter. Beyond these issues regarding his defense, Suge Knight also made complaints about his failing health. He claimed that he got close to losing his life after he was forced to undergo emergency surgery on his appendix. He claimed to have lost 65 pounds in the process. There were, of course, a couple of raised eyebrows about whether he had been feigning a health condition to get out of the box. He did not hesitate to debunk these claims on the grounds that he willingly turned himself into the police, an action that he did not hesitate to reference multiple times during the hearing. Knight was restricted to making a single phone call every week, and he regarded this particular situation as a major setback in building his defense in preparation for the trial. Suge also addressed the massive personal attorney that the conditions have caused him. Since he did not have the proper access to good counsel, he kept running through lawyers like a hot knife through butter. He went as far as throwing a jab at some of his former lawyers who were more bothered about how much money they could make from striking deals with production companies that were interested in making documentaries with the story. After hearing all that Knight had to say, Judge Cohen considered it just to pass a note to the jailers that lifted phone call restrictions placed on Knight. He was now allowed to call his attorney at whatever time he felt the need to. And while you would be right to conclude that things got better for Suge Knight following this hearing, the reverse was the case. In 2017, Knight was back in front of a judge to call out the extreme restrictions he had been facing in jail. In his words, the officers in charge gave better treatment to who he claimed killed officers of the law and children. On this occasion, it was not the judge handling the murder case that was seated for this hearing. This time, Suge Knight was at the mercy of Judge William Ryan, a judge that had sustained a number of restrictions placed on the former music boss. For this hearing, Knight's father, mother, and son were present and watching from the gallery. To put this in context, this was the first time in 2 years that Suge Knight had laid eyes on his son. He was also restricted from visiting his father in jail. On top of all the drama of not being allowed to see his family, which Knight referred to as cruel and unusual, he also mentioned that jailers did not grant him permission to meet with his attorneys on weekends. This was a privilege that was generally allowed for other inmates. Knight's counsel by the time of this hearing was now Jeremy LASHEIM. He weighed in on the matter, claiming that he was almost always met with an unusual difficulty when he came to meet with Suge Knight. The lawyer told the court that sometimes jailers were left uninformed regarding court orders, while other times they claimed to not have the personnel that would escort Knight down. Another big gap in this situation was created by a declaration of the sheriff's department to Judge Ryan that was filed under seal. This declaration staying sealed meant that Knight's attorneys would never be able to access it, hence never understanding why such intense restrictions were placed on Suge Knight, more like fighting a monster with a blindfold on. The best the jailers could say was that the restrictions were put in place to maintain a high level of security in the prison. But how did Suge Knight get here? What crime got Suge Knight in this position in the first place? Suge Knight was charged with the murder of Terry Carter and the attempted murder of CLE Dinyaki Sloan. On the 29th of January 2015, Suge Knight intentionally hit the two men with his pickup truck in the parking lot of a Tam's Burgers restaurant. The attack killed Terry Carter and critically injured Sloan. Suge Knight maintained that he was not guilty of the crimes. He said that his actions were only out of self-defense when Sloan drew near to his truck in a hostile manner. He also went as far as claiming that Sloan had a weapon on him, which triggered his actions. Suge Knight pulled up to the scene of a promotional shoot for Straight Outta Compton, a film that Sloan worked on as an advisor. Dr. Dre and Ice Cube were also in the vicinity shooting the promo video for the movie when the altercation between Suge Knight and Sloan took place. To date, it is still generally unclear why or how Suge Knight ended up in this location. There were initial rumors that he had been there to confront Dr. Dre, and while Suge Knight completely denied having any malicious intent for being in the location, previous events make that a little hard to believe. Suge Knight had already testified under oath in the past that he got information that Dre was behind an attempted assassination that happened in 2014. Regardless of this connection that would make it obvious that Suge was on that set with ill intent, he claims that he merely stumbled upon their set. He also added in a future testimony that he left and was later invited and ambushed by Sloan before acting in self-defense. Whatever his reason for being on set, what mattered to the prosecution is that he killed a man and nearly killed another. The initial charge was a murder charge since there was obvious evidence of intent as he reversed, changed gears, stepped on the pedal, and ran right into the men. Despite a really interesting buildup following his arrest that built anticipation for the trial, the case never made it to trial. After so many hurdles, restrictions, and struggling to maintain a lawyer, Suge Knight decided to take a plea deal and got convicted for voluntary manslaughter instead. He was sentenced to a total of 28 years in prison. Suge Knight got himself 22 years in prison for running down Carter and Sloan with his truck. He got the extra 6 years as punishment for a third strike of being on the wrong side of the law and probation violations. Yes, third strike. While this incident put Suge Knight away for a long time, it was not the first time he was involved in illegal activities. There was a reason he was considered one of the most feared men in the hip-hop industry. With that being said, let us address some of the crazy things that Suge Knight did while he could still walk freely. Freedom. When the news of Suge Knight's attack on Terry Carter and Sloan broke, it did not come as much of a surprise to most people who were familiar with Suge's track record of violence and feuds. The hip-hop industry is generally surrounded by a lot of beef, and Suge Knight took that to a whole new level. He not only developed a beef with almost everyone he came in contact with or contracted with, but also managed to start an all-out war in the hip-hop industry. The most amazing part is that these were not normal beef. There is no individual in hip-hop history that has been connected to as many deaths and violent acts as Suge Knight. It's a reputation on the foundation of being a very brutal opposition, and is even believed to have turned on people who had been a part of his crew. One story that always gets a lot of attention is his interaction with Vanilla Ice. The young artist had just started hitting the big numbers as an artist, and on a random day at a restaurant, Suge shows up unprovoked. The two had apparently not met before, but Suge came in with his goons and had Ice's security removed from the room. Suge then sat at the same table as Ice and just stared for a while without a word. Suge later introduced himself and asked Vanilla Ice how he was doing. This was the first of the many unprovoked pop-ups that Suge Knight continued to pull on Vanilla Ice until that one night. Ice had just gotten to a room on the 15th floor of the Bel Age Hotel, only to be startled by the imposing figure of Suge Knight and his henchmen. Suge's men took out Ice's team, but what happened after this point remains unclear. Some say that Suge took Ice to the balcony and merely made him look over the edge, while some others say that he actually dangled Vanilla Ice over the balcony. Ice refuted the second stride, but whatever Suge did to threaten Vanilla Ice was enough to get him to sign a bunch of documents that allotted all the royalties from his hit song Ice Baby to Suge Knight. The backstory, though, is that an artist under Suge named Mario Johnson had been responsible for writing the song, but never got paid. The papers signed that day saw a whopping $4 million transferred to Suge Knight, and this massive sum allowed him to start Death Row Records. But an even bigger name on the list of people that really got into the bad book of Suge Knight is Snoop Dogg. After Snoop Dogg got acquitted of a murder charge in 1996, possibly because of the scare of nearly going away for a long time and the birth of his first son in 1994, Snoop decided to avoid all the violence and hostility that made the job more dangerous than it should be. Sadly, this was about the same period that Suge Knight had signed Tupac and started waging war against Diddy and East Coast artists. More on that in a bit. Snoop was not trying to get involved with all that beefing and feuding, and publicly sent love to Diddy and Biggie on a Hot 97 episode. While this was Snoop trying trying to spread a little more love in the space, he nearly died for an act of love. When he returned to the hotel, he could tell that there was a shadow of hostility hovering around him with Suge, Pac, and other guys in the label. They began neglecting him. On the drive to the airport, Snoop was not allowed to move with Suge's security detail. Knowing just how volatile Suge can be, Snoop got on the plane, strapped himself with a fork, knife, and a blanket, and sat at the very back of the plane. This way, if a brother wanted to run up on him, he would at least see it coming. Snoop tried speaking to Tupac after the flight, but Pac paid no attention to him. To make a bad situation worse, Pac was shot and killed a few days later in Vegas. This fueled more problems between Suge and Snoop that stories claim got very physical and even life-threatening for Snoop in some cases. But speaking of Tupac, Suge's partnership with Tupac started what remains at the top of the list of greatest rivalries in the American music industry. Suge Knight started the clash between East and West Coast rappers. At the time Suge Knight started Death Row Records, Tupac and Big were the most prominent rappers in the game. While the two initially had no bad blood between them, they fell out after Tupac got robbed at Quad Studios, went to jail, and Big released a track that seemed targeted at Tupac. Big maintained that he did not have any intention of dissing Pac with the song Who Shot Ya, which contained a lot of lines that seemed similar to what had happened to Tupac. Tupac made it clear that he was displeased by the track, and Big should have been more sensitive about putting out such a song, knowing everyone thought it was about him, even if it was not. There are still rumors that Diddy, who was managing Big at the time, was interested in the beef between the two rappers as it would trigger the sales of more records. Suge Knight came into the picture and signed Tupac Shakur while he was serving time for a sexual assault case. And this partnership was the start of one of the most popular beefs of all time between Suge Knight's Tupac on the West Coast and Puff Diddy's East Coast Big. Things got serious after Suge called out Diddy for always trying to show up in his artist's music videos on the stage of the 1995 Source Awards.
And one other thing I'd like to say, any artist out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star, don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the record, dancing. Come to Death Row.
Diddy was known to constantly plant himself in the music videos of the top artists signed to his label, probably in a bid to keep himself in the limelight. Suge took advantage of this to make jest of him. A public diss put every other thing that followed in motion, including a showdown that happened about a month after the award show where one person died. Rappers from the East and West Coast ended up at a birthday party for Jermaine Dupri, and both sides got into a nasty fight. One of Suge Knight's boys, known as Big Jake, lost his life after getting shot and killed just outside the party. Unfortunately, smartphones did not exist at the time for visual evidence of what really went down. However, Keith Murray tells stories about Suge actually throwing a slap at the party. Despite the lack of evidence or corroboration, it is pretty easy to believe that Suge would do something like that. The East versus West Coast feud continued to become increasingly violent, and most believe that it contributed to the death of two of the most prolific rappers in hip-hop history, Big and Tupac. And all of it started thanks to Suge Knight. But even more interesting, Suge Knight was tied to the death of Biggie. There were a bunch of rumors claiming that Suge had hired a hitman to take Biggie out. Unfortunately, by the time the said hitman named Poochie was discovered to be responsible for Biggie's death, he had already lost his life to a shooting. In keeping with his pattern of developing major problems with people who have worked with him, another name on the list is Dr. Dre. Interestingly, he was part of the conversation in the controversy that finally ended in the imprisonment of Suge Knight. Despite joining forces to build Death Row Records and growing into a formidable brand, Dre and Suge fell out shortly after their utterly explosive success. While it was nothing as intense as some of the stories these other stories, you can trust Suge Knight to turn anything into a war. Dr. Dre got to a point where he concluded that his goals and those of Death Row Records were no longer aligned, and he asked to leave. Dre left to start his label, Aftermath. This triggered Suge Knight and his favorite boy, Tupac. Apart from spreading all manner of stories about Dr. Dre, Tupac went as far as writing and recording a diss track on Dr. Dre titled Toss It Up. By the time the song came out, Tupac had been shot dead, so Dre never responded. Then in 2016, Suge attacked again with a claim that Dr. Dre hired someone to have him killed. This was just before he was arrested for the murder of Terry Carter. The rumor was that Dre tried to have him killed because he owed $900 million from an Apple deal that he did not want to pay to Suge Knight. Without any evidence to nail Dre, Suge started going after the superstar artists that Dre had signed, Eminem and 50 Cent. On one occasion, Suge had Eminem surrounded by Death Row dudes at the Source Awards. This was just one of many attempts, but Suge seemed to just use these as intimidation tactics to keep the competition scared. During the video shoot for one of 50's greatest hits, In Da Club, Suge Knight showed up out of nowhere with 30 of his goons. Eminem was said to have been on set set at the time as well, and the crew was ready to bring the fight in case anything went down. 50 Cent reportedly questioned Suge, add video here. Suge merely looked around for a bit and left with his men without saying a word or throwing a punch. Eazy-E is another big name that Suge clashed with, and you are not going to believe who was also involved in this situation. It is none other than Dr. Dre. What a relationship these two have had. Artists like DJ Yella, Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, and Eazy-E were all in the NWA music group managed by Jerry Heller. However, the group started falling apart after Dre suspected Eazy and Jerry Heller were mismanaging the group's funds. As a result, Dr. Dre decided to end the contract. Eazy, on the other hand, was not having any of that. To help force his way out of the group, Dre had to bring in Suge Knight, and help he did. The stories say that Knight showed up at a recording studio where Eazy-E had been chilling with his boys to intimidate Eazy. Eazy refused to cave initially, but Suge let him know that he had gotten Heller kidnapped and was keeping him hostage. Unsurprisingly, there are so many different stories about what exactly happened at the studio. In the Straight Outta Compton movie, the scene shows Suge actually throwing hands at Eazy. Some other versions of the story claim that Eazy was still unmoved by the news of Heller's kidnapping until Suge pulled out a piece of paper with Eazy's mother's address written on it. The details of how are of little importance at this point. What matters is that Suge got Eazy to sign the contract release that set Dr. Dre free from NWA, but that is not the craziest part of the story. A couple of months and diss tracks later, Eazy-E died after getting diagnosed with HIV/AIDS. While this condition was very rampant at the time, rumors began to spring up that Suge was connected to Eazy's death. What's more scary is that this rumor was not entirely unfounded. Suge Knight was in an interview with Jimmy Kimmel shortly after Eazy-E's person and started talking about how AIDS could be weaponized.
It's something called, they get blood from somebody with AIDS, and then they shoot you with it.
Oh, so that seems bad.
That's a slow death.
Yeah.
An easy thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of course, all of this was hearsay and less than enough to begin an investigation into Suge Knight's involvement in Eazy's death. With such a career so heavily highlighted by violence and controversy, it is understandable that Suge Knight was considered one of the most violent and most feared men in the music industry. But all that has now gone away with the prison sentence that put him behind bars. The almost unlimited resources that he had and the level of control that came with it now mean absolutely nothing. And while the natural expectation for such a dominant being would be to get to prison and immediately become the biggest dog in the yard, the complete opposite is said to be the case. Word on the street is that Suge got to jail and had faded into a very pale reflection of what he used to be. As unbelievable as it may sound, Suge Knight is said to be scared and as mellow as a wounded lion as he serves his sentence. These sudden behavioral changes do not come as much of a surprise though. Suge Knight is not the first man to be humbled by the four walls of a prison, and this says a lot about the prison system and those who have been trusted to run it behind bars. It is not news that a lot of artists go to jail and send messages about their conditions that are very similar to what Suge Knight was put through. One of such stories is the sad story of YNW Melly. Melly had everything going perfectly for him until he was sent to jail on 2 charges of first-degree murder in 2019, a crime that he claims he never committed. But whether or not he is guilty is a story for another video. For now, I want to address the injustice that YNW has cried about from prison. In a very long Instagram post, YNW highlighted a long list of things that he has been experiencing time, stating that he has been suffering and in fear. The first thing that the post points out is how 24-year-old Melly has been completely isolated from his family. He mentioned that the restriction from seeing his family was affecting his mental health. Like with Suge Knight, these blockers were not only placed for his family, but also for seeing his lawyers and any connection whatsoever that he had to the outside world. He also mentioned that he had been indefinitely prohibited from using the phone for using another inmate's PIN. In the Instagram post, Melly wrote, "Usually when someone gets disciplined for this, it is usually for 30 days. It is now going on 8 months. No other inmate in this jail is being treated this way." Melly believed that he was being specifically targeted by prison authorities because he is a celebrity. But what makes this story even worse is that, like Suge Knight, Melly was still awaiting trial. The main difference being that the prosecution was trying to get the death penalty. While it is hard to tell whether or not Melly was responsible for the crime he has been accused of, this next one is a teenage rapper who became a superstar while on the run from the law. Tay K was notorious in every sense of the word. His initial arrest was in 2016 for a home invasion where one person was killed. For whatever reason, Tay K considered it a good idea to free himself, form his ankle monitor. He also took to Twitter to post, "This house arrest 12. That Gian have 2 Catch Me on Hood. While on the run, he recorded and released his hit song, The Race. You would expect him to attempt to maintain a lower profile with law enforcement after him, and the royalties he would get from a hit song, but TK went on to commit even more crimes. He robbed and shot a photographer, and also robbed and mercilessly beat a 65-year-old store owner. He was eventually captured by U.S. Marshals in 2017, and this is where the story begins to turn very sour. Despite the fact that Tay was only 16 when the original crime was committed, the court chose to try him as an adult and slammed him with a 50-year sentence. But it did not end there. The court also piled an extra 30 years for aggravated robbery and 2 extra sentences to last 13 years. All of these sentences were to be served simultaneously, however, and this is merely the tip of the iceberg, considering that he is still yet to stand trial for the mother of the photographer and a suit by the assaulted store owner. Well, before then, prison life is already dealing major blows at the youngster's mental health. Apart from the fact he believes that there was racial bias in the judgment given to him since he was still a minor when the crime happened, and he was not the one that did the shooting. Neither did he wield a weapon. He has also cried out about being treated like a ferret in prison. Major concerns started to arise when a photo of Tay K was posted on Twitter, in which he was putting on a suicide prevention vest. Easy to see why he would want to end his life considering the length of his sentence and the unfairness he believes he's facing. Like Suge, after facing the harsh reality of life behind bars, Tay K became a more tame version of the violent criminal he used to be. In one of the statements that was put on his Twitter page while he was in prison, he told fans that he intended to stop promoting violence and start concentrating more on putting out positivity. I guess prison life does truly humble a man, and the next victim of prison life needs no introduction. Tory Lanez. Have you ever heard of a person beg to be transferred to a state prison? Now, why would anyone do that? Well, Tory Lanez was so depressed by the conditions and oppression that he went through at the Los Angeles County Jail that he believed a state prison would be a vacation for him in comparison. Lanez got into this mess after shooting Megan Thee Stallion in the foot. There have been a lot of controversies and unconfirmed stories surrounding the case overall, from rumors that Megan had hit Lanez first to Megan initially saying that she had been wounded by the glass before telling the cops that she was actually shot. Either way, Lanez was arrested and convicted of assault with a semi-automatic handgun, carrying a loaded and unregistered firearm in his vehicle, and gross negligence in discharging his firearm. These 3 felony charges landed him a long 10-year sentence. Tory Lanez believed that the reason he was being treated with such extra hostility was because he was a celebrity, and so far, you can already tell that this is a pattern with prisons and making sure that popular people have the worst possible time. To show just how bad the situation was with Tory Lanez when the hearing took place concerning his isolation in county jail, the attorney who represented him was Rhonda Dixon. Without any explanation, Tory Lanez's official attorneys were not paying any attention to his plight in jail. There was a story about being owed some money, hence denying Lanez proper representation, but they denied the existence of such. Lanez was only able to access Rhonda Dixon because she had been representing a client who was in the same area as Tory and asked that she meet with him. According to the motion filed by Dixon, because he was a popular inmate, the sheriff decided that he was a huge threat and had to be kept in the same condition as people convicted or serial rape or murder. The isolation that Tory Lanez experienced was so bad that he asked Dixon to inform the court that he would want to be transferred to a state prison. Why? His reason was simple. He believed that at a state prison, he would be able to at least get out in the yard for some human interaction. When Lanez appeared in court after about 8 months in the county jail, you would not need a second look to deduce that he had been going through mental and emotional hell. Similarly, Suge Knight was also visibly deteriorating in health, even to the point where he had to be wheeled into the courtroom. This consistent maltreatment of celebrities whenever they are unfortunately thrown in prison is too much of a pattern to overlook. I think it is so much worse seeing that just about the same thing happens to all of these celebrities regardless of their crimes or whether they have been found.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. That helps out the channel's algorithm. Big salute to all my subscribers. If you're not subscribed to the channel, then hit that red subscribe button and subscribe. Peace to all of y'all. LASHEIM to God. Keep low, you never tell, they'll never know. Stay focused.